Hello guys, gals, and my non-binary pals. Welcome back to my channel. Today I thought it'd be fun to dress up a little bit and record my best and worst reads of 2020 for you guys. So I have a total of 10 books. It's going to be 5 books in each category. There are some books I've already talked about kind of extensively in previous books that I won't get into too much because I don't want to repeat the same things I'm sure you guys have already heard. So let's just get right into it. Okay, so I'm going to start with my top 5 worst reads of 2020. And to be honest, these are mostly like my most disappointing reads that really let me down and just didn't hit the mark. I'm going to start with number 5, which is like the best of the worst, and then we'll work our way up. So at number 5, I have A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. And for anybody who doesn't really know what this book is, it's the companion novel, the novella to the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. This book is supposed to just follow up to the events of what happened in the last book, where they're kind of recovering from things that happened, and it's supposed to be like their normal lives afterwards. It's supposed to be like a Christmas story, so it's like warm and, you know, heartfelt and very cute, and I feel like this book did not do any of that very well. I gave this book a 2 stars out of 5, which was definitely a bummer because I ordered this book as soon as I finished the original 3 books. So I was super excited to get into it because the cover was just stunning, and I was like, oh, a winter story about like my favorite characters is gonna be awesome. And if you guys don't already know, ACOTAR was actually the first series that I got into when I started reading again. I feel like the general consensus for this book is that even if you're a big fan of the original ACOTAR series, this book just falls really, really short of what everybody was hoping it would be, and I completely agree with it. The story was kind of pointless. There was really no plot at all, and I was hoping at least for some cute fluffiness, but instead it was just a lot of, I don't know, a lot of nothing. Like, I can't even tell you really what this book was about or what happened in it because it was just 200 pages of nothing. But if you guys are fans of the ACOTAR series and you've read this book, let me know what you think. Maybe your opinions are different. I would be curious to know if you did enjoy this book, what you liked about it. Now, coming in at number 4, we have Normal People by Sally Rooney. And this book got a lot of attention, a lot of hype, and a lot of praise for what? I truly have no idea. I was incredibly bored when I read this book. I took it with me on my trip to Hawaii last Christmas with my boyfriend, but this story follows 2 people. I think they're either British or Irish or something like that. But their names are Connell and Marianne, and at the start of the book, they have this dynamic where they know each other because Connell's mother works for Marianne's family, and Connell's family is like not very well off and Marianne's is, and they go to the same school, but they don't acknowledge each other in public. But they have this kind of like weird relationship, which is kept down low because Connell is like the popular cool kid at school and Marianne is very much not. And then as they grow up, the dynamic completely shifts, and Marianne finds her people, her clique, and she becomes very popular in college versus Connell, who was the cool kid in high school and now in college is just very much withdrawn and he doesn't really have many friends. This whole story is just their lives constantly intersecting over years. So this is a YA contemporary, and in general, I don't really vibe well with YA contemporaries. A lot of times they just end up boring me, but because this book was so hype, I just had a lot of expectations. I thought it was gonna be great. I thought it would be a good book to get me out of my kind of anti-contemporary phase, but it definitely did not work for me. It was definitely a disappointment. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, and I felt like for most of the book, I was kind of just like, okay, like trudging along, but the ending really killed it for me. Like, it was one of the most disappointing endings I've ever read. I literally remember sitting on the plane, I think it was on the plane home from Hawaii, and I was telling my boyfriend when it was done, I was like, this can't be it. This can't be it. I was like turning the pages. I was like, this is the ending. It was just such a letdown, and especially after pushing through 300 pages of just boring internal monologue for these characters, I was really hoping for at least a bang at the end, like a reason to understand why people love this book so much, and I just did not get it. The next book is a more recent read for me. It's actually the highest rated book on this list, and while I did rate it significantly higher than the rest of these books, it didn't mean that I enjoyed it. It was still a huge disappointment for me, and that was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V. Schwab. And I've talked about this book several times already on my channel, so I don't want to get into it too much, but basically in this book we follow the story of Addie LaRue, who is perpetually 23 years old since the 1700s. it's when she strikes a deal with the devil to never age, but as a consequence of that deal, she also is forgotten by every single person that she meets. So she goes through centuries of living this kind of meaningless life of meeting people and traveling to different places and yet never being remembered by anybody. So she continues to live this way until she meets somebody in current day in New York City who happens to remember her, the first person in centuries to remember her. And it's just the story about her life, what she's gone through, as well as her relationship with this person and her relationship with the devil. So everything about that sounds really exciting, really interesting. I was super excited because this was also the very first V.E. Schwab book I've ever read, and everything about it just seemed really amazing. And I was incredibly disappointed with how far it fell from my expectations. I found it to be extremely repetitive. The writing was not exactly my style. It was a bit too lengthy and descriptive with, I felt like, unnecessary things. I feel like there was so much opportunity to do so much with this book and with this girl's life. Literally, she lived for like 3 centuries. She could have gone anywhere. She could have done anything. And yet we are stuck in the beginning portions of her life for so much of the book and so much of the struggle in that it was a bit of a bummer actually, because we just constantly hear over and over how hard her life is, and I'm just like, why do you keep doing this? Why don't you just give up? Because like, what is the point of all of this? And it's especially unfair because I couldn't help but to compare it to one of my favorite movies of all time, which is The Age of Adeline, because it's literally a movie about a woman named Adeline who cannot age. And so I couldn't help but to compare the two because the premises sounded very similar. But whereas I loved that movie and I've rewatched it a million times, this book I have no interest in ever picking up again and ever reading because it was just so boring and repetitive to me. The only part that actually intrigued me, like actually got me interested, was whenever she interacted with Luke, who is the devil. I was pretty invested in their relationship. I was really curious to see what their dynamic was like, whatever interactions they had, what history they had, and not necessarily in a romantic sense. It was really just the most interesting point of this entire book for me. So I did give this book a 3.5 stars, but I feel like honestly, in my personal opinion, I should have given it something more like a 2 or so because that was my actual level of interest. Interestingly enough, this next book is actually also another book of the month pick for me. Clearly, I'm getting a lot of misses with book of the month, which is a bit disappointing because I've been subscribed to them for so long, but you know that happens when you're picking a book that you've never heard of before. Anyway, it's Star Daughter by Shveta Thakar, and this was an add-on to actually my last book. I have literally talked about this book several times on this channel already. I think it's included in 3 or 4 of my videos, and I only have like 4 videos up currently, so I do not want to talk about this book too much. If you are curious, I did go into quite a bit of detail into the reason why I dislike this book in my December wrap-up. So in this book, we follow Sheetal, who is a 17-year-old Indian American girl who lives in New Jersey with her father. She's actually half human and half star. Her half star parentage comes from her mother, who lives in the Star Courts, and because of something that happens with her father, she has to go on a mission to find a cure for him, which leads her to the Star Courts and leads her back to her mother, and that's basically where the entire story takes place. It definitely sounded like something I would love. It has stars, it has mythology, it has a main character who's a person of color, like so many reasons to love this book and to be excited for it, and yet everything about it was disappointing. I gave this book a 1 star, and the only thing that I can really say to summarize my feelings about this book is that it was incredibly boring. Everything about it was boring from start to finish. There were some confusing parts that just led to more boredom, and I was just glad when it ended, even though the ending really pissed me off for reasons that I included in my December wrap-up. So if you're curious about that, go watch that video. Now, given how much I disliked this book, you would think that I would want to steer clear of anything else that Shveta Thakar ever writes, but this is her debut novel, so I'm going to give her some leeway, and I am definitely curious to see what she comes out with in the future, so I'll never say never to that, but I hope that I like her future books significantly more than this one. Now onto the last book in this category, coming in at number 1, my absolute worst, most disappointing read of 2020. It's actually a book that I don't have, thank God. It's A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kember. Now, this book is her second book in her A Curse So Dark and Lonely series, and I absolutely loved the first book, but the second book was a huge disappointment to me. In the first book, we follow Wren, Harper, and Gray, and Harper is a 17-year-old girl with cerebral palsy, and she accidentally gets kidnapped by Gray and brought to their like fairy tale world or whatever to help break the curse on their land, because Wren is actually the Beast in this Beauty and the Beast retelling, and And so in classic form, you know, the beauty has to fall in love with the beast, but Harper isn't your very typical beauty because she's apparently average looking and she has cerebral palsy and she's not what you would expect for a main character of this kind of book. And I loved this story for so many of those reasons, as well as the way that Brigid Kemmerer decided to take the story. It was just such a unique twist on the Beauty and the Beast story, and not one that I feel like anybody could have anticipated going into it. So with that, I was really excited for the second book because the second book was supposed to take place from Gray's perspective. And Gray is Ren's bodyguard in the first book. We know that a lot of things are going to happen, like there's going to be a lot of change, and I was really excited to read from his perspective because I think in general he's like a favorite character for people because he's so kind-hearted and gentle and quiet. And it was just heartbreaking to see the direction that Brigid Kemmerer decided to go in the second book, because everything that I loved about the characters in the first book, like Harper's strength and her uniqueness, her individuality, and Ren's character development, his personal and mental growth, everything like that just went to complete waste. And it's like Brigid Kemmerer like forgot who her characters were, or even forgot that she wrote a first book, because they were not the same characters at all. It was really, really disappointing to see because I absolutely fell in love with the characters and I was so excited for this series. But now I know that I pretty much have to consider A Curse So Dark and Lonely as a standalone, which is kind of impossible when you read the ending, but that's what I'm gonna have to do because I love that book so much. I will not forget it, I will not throw it away, but I will throw away this book. This was such a bummer for me that I actually ended up DNFing this book 50% of the way through, and then I skimmed through the rest of it just to see what was happening, and I'm glad that I DNF'd it when I did because it just got so ridiculous and didn't go in a direction that I liked at all, with characters that I didn't enjoy at all. So this was definitely a 1-star read for me. If I could give it less, I certainly would, but 1 star it is. Okay, so now we are on to my top 5 best reads of 2020, and all 5 of these books are actually 5-star reads, which is just amazing. I'm so glad to say that I've had so many 5-star reads this year. So coming in at number 5, we have The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. I actually read this book quite recently. I just love the way that it tied off the story, the development of the characters that continued even in the third book, and all of the events that happened. This is a very short book, especially for a final book in a series, and I feel like it wrapped it up very neatly in just the span of 300 pages. So The Queen of Nothing is the third and final book in the Folk of the Air series, where we follow a 17-year-old human girl named Jude who is living in the land of fairy, and the entire series follows her and the challenges that she faces being a human living with fairies, and all of the court and political drama that happens because she gets involved with Cardan, who is one of the royal princes in the land. That's the best way that I can summarize it without giving anything away, but I absolutely recommend this series to anybody who is curious about it because it's a very short series. Each book is only 300 to 400 pages each, and you get really sucked into the world and the writing, and each of the characters has just such a dynamic and strong personality, and you get really invested. So I would definitely check these out if you haven't already. My next best read of 2020 was Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, and there is not one single thing I don't love about this book. Actually, no, there is one thing that I don't love that happened in this book, but it was done so well that I can forgive it, even though I will never get over it, and it absolutely broke my heart. If you guys have read this book and this book series, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Basically, Crooked Kingdom is the second book in the Six of Crows duology, soon to be a series because there's a third book coming out. But in this book series, we follow 6 characters who have incredibly different personalities. They're very close-knit, and they are part of a gang called the Dregs in Ketterdam, which is a city in the Grishaverse. And in the first book, Six of Crows, we're following them as they are offered this job to do this insane heist, and that's where we get to know more about their relationships and their personalities and their dynamics. And in the second book, we are following up to the consequences and the events that happen after that heist. So for me, while I did love Six of Crows, there is a special place in my heart for Crooked Kingdom because I cried so much reading this book. Everything about the way that this book wrapped up, everything that happened, like I have never felt so much anxiety and excitement and just curiosity for what was going to happen, because there are a million things going against this team. Every time that they have a plan and they're kind of like, okay, this is what we're going to do, you're sitting at the edge of your seat and you're just like, oh my god, like you're so anxious and nervous that things are going to go wrong because it's all extremely high stakes. So any book that can make me feel that invested with the characters and the storyline and not have me feel bored at any part of the story, I would say that's an absolute 5-star read. This book series was actually my introduction to the Grishaverse and Leigh Bardugo's writing, and oh my god, what a great introduction it was. I am so hyped now to read Shadow and Bone as well as King of Scars and to expand my love for the characters in this world. The next book on my list is actually a recent read for me. I don't have it with me because it was also a library book, but it's The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and there is so much to say about this book, so many reasons why it's great and why it was a definite 5-star read for me. So in The Song of Achilles, we actually follow Patroclus, who is Achilles' lover, and we follow his life story from when he's young to when he's older and he's already met Patroclus, and when they're going through the Trojan War that happens in the Odyssey. Now, I don't know too much about the Iliad or the Odyssey or anything like that, but I do feel like Madeline Miller does a great job of making you feel like you don't need to have read those books to understand the characters or the stories or anything like that. I am vaguely familiar with some of the characters like Odysseus and Achilles, but this book definitely doesn't make you feel like you're missing out on any knowledge or anything like that by not reading those books. I honestly can't praise this book enough. This is an older book. It came out in, I believe, 2012, but it truly holds up. I think it's absolutely a classic. It was so beautifully written, and Madeline Miller does such an amazing job of breathing life into these characters, into really making you understand their psyche and their relationships with each other. There are so many things about the way that she wrote these characters and the storyline that were just completely new to me. Like the fact that she was able to write Patroclus, who's the main character, as almost like a secondary character in not only the story but his own life, but even more so the ending. The way that everything transpired at the end and the way that the story continues when you think that the story should be over is just incredible. I have never read another book like that. I don't know if I ever will, to be honest. It was so unique, it was so creative, and I cried my heart out. In the last 100 or so pages, I cried nonstop. And I will always appreciate any book that makes me feel strong enough to actually cry for that long. So yes, an absolute 5-star read for me. Okay, now we reached my top 2 best reads for the year, and they're actually both Sarah J. Maas books. Now, while I do like Sarah J. Maas's writing, I can't say that she's like my favorite author of all time or anything. It just happens to be purely coincidental that 2 of my favorite books of the year are her books. But coming in at number 2, we have The Kingdom of Ash, and this is the last and final book in her Throne of Glass series, which is a 7.5 long book series. This book is a struggle to hold up. This book is almost 1,000 pages long. It's 984 pages long, and I'm like breaking my wrist trying to hold it up right now. So I'm just gonna put it down here while I talk about this. Now, I know that I am not someone who is good at summarizing books because I struggle with it a lot and I plan in advance so that I'm not stumbling on camera, but it takes a lot of brain power for me to try to figure out a good way to summarize a book. But truly, this book series has me stumped. I don't know how I can summarize the entire book series for you guys without giving away anything. The best that I've come up with is that in Throne of Glass, we follow Celaena, who is known as Arderlyn's top assassin, and the story starts off as she's been a slave at the Endovier salt mines for a year, and she is brought back to the kingdom on the grounds that she's being brought back for this competition where she has to become the king's assassin. And the story kicks off from there. I literally can't say anything else without spoiling the entire book series for you guys, even though there's so much to say. But anyway, focusing back on this book, King of Ash is the final and last book in the Throne of Glass series, and so it's wrapping up all of the events, all of the drama and the craziness that has happened in the previous 6.5 books. Now, I can't say that I've absolutely loved every single book in this series. There are some books that were just okay to me and some books that were better than others, but this book, like, I knew that it had to be good because it was gonna wrap up this huge book series, and I was not disappointed. I am so happy with the way that everything went. It didn't go necessarily in a direction that I expected, and things didn't play out the way that I thought they would, but it was so much better because of that. One of my absolute favorite things that writers or authors will do in books and movies is when they tie back things to earlier parts of the story. So for example, there are things that are brought up in this book series that literally are talked about in like the first book, in the second book, and I love that because you can't help but respect that the author didn't just write all of these books over the span of like 10 years and ignore everything that happened earlier, like just completely moved on from it. She made it a point to bring those elements back and have them still be featured as a part of the characters and the story and all of the drama and everything. And I could not get over, when I was reading each book, how much things would tie back to the previous books. Literally, I shotgunned these books. I read all 7.5 of them in the span of like 2 weeks or something. And like I said, this one book alone is 1,000 pages. So you can imagine how many pages it is accumulated with all of them together. But it was absolutely worth it. If you guys have watched my previous videos, you know that I have read several different YA fantasy series in the past few months. Granted, I haven't read any books that are even close to having 7 parts in the series, but regardless, it's the best. Obviously, I recognize that it's incredibly intimidating to see 7.5 massive books and be like, oh yeah, I recommend that. Everybody should read it. I don't think it's for everybody because it is a huge investment. But if you're a fan of Sarah J. Maas or young adult fantasy, or it's been on your TBR and you've been considering it for a while, I would just say do it. Give it a try. All right, folks, we are now finally on to the very last book that I'm going to talk about in this video. My number 1 best read of 2020. The book that is truly in its own tier because I love it that much. It is House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I love everything about this book. I feel like I have said that several times in several different occasions about a few different books, but truly, I have never meant it more than with this book. Like, I'm not even just talking about what happens in the book and with the characters and everything. I am literally talking about the cover and the art. The number of times that I went back to that artwork in this book was ridiculous. So in this book series, we're following Bryce Quinlan, who is a half human, half fairy person who is living in Crescent City, and she's described by the little insert as having the perfect life. She's a party girl who works hard and plays hard. I wouldn't necessarily put it down that way. Like, I don't know where they got perfect life from, but I guess she has it pretty good, all things considered. And things really kick off in the story when some of her closest friends are actually brutally murdered, and she goes through this whole thing where she has to grieve because she's lost so much, but it's also incredibly difficult for her to deal with the fact that she is so alone in her life now. And so in comes Hunt Athalar, who is a fallen angel who is actually enslaved to the archangels who rule the city. And basically he and Bryce are forced to team up together to figure out this whole mystery of who killed her friends and what's going on and everything, because there's a lot of shady shit that happens in this book. One criticism that I've heard for this book is that people were a little bit confused about the setting of it. Basically, the world that they live in, and specifically in Crescent City, it's like a metropolitan city where they have cars and they have cell phones and, you know, all of this technology that we have in our current day as well. And yet there are like werewolves and fairies and stuff walking around in business suits. And so I guess that tripped some people out. They were like, how is this high fantasy? But for me, I thought it was great. I've never read another book like this where they have fairies in a more urban setting. I'm sure that they exist, but I was so excited to see that that was the setting for this book. It was so unique to me. I didn't expect it, and I'm so glad that that's the direction that Sarah J. Maas decided to take with this new book series. And I'm so excited for the rest of these books. I don't know how many more she's gonna do. I'm assuming it's gonna be at least a trilogy, but I'll take even more if she's ready to hand them out. Now, one thing with Sarah J. Maas's writing is that she never sticks with the first love character in her books, and that's like a known thing across all of her book series. So I'm Team Hunt 1,000% of the way. I absolutely don't understand how people are shipping Bryce and Adis together, because literally they only interacted for maybe like 2 pages in the entire book. Like, we barely got anything. So I don't know why you guys are shipping them so hard when they barely had any interactions, versus this entire book was a book about Hunt and Bryce's relationship, and you guys aren't shipping them. I don't understand, but I will die with this shit. I can't imagine my tan, curvy, stunning, half fairy, half human queen being in a relationship with this pasty blonde man who lives underworld. Like, no thank you. She deserves to be with a tall, dark, and handsome angel, okay? Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Anyway, so this was one of the first books that I read when I started reading up again. And the fact that I have read so many books since then, and this still continues to be number 1 in my heart, I feel like shows truly how good this book is. And obviously how much I personally love this book, because I am not exaggerating when I say that for weeks after I read this book, weeks, I was thinking about this book every single day. So if you have been thinking about reading this book, I know 800 pages is definitely a little bit intimidating, but give it a chance, give it a try. It gets really, really interesting, and there are a lot of twists that I feel like you don't expect. Okay guys, we have made it to the end of this video. If you have watched the whole thing, thank you so much. I would love to know if any of these books are on your guys' best or worst reads of the year, and what your guys' best and worst reads for the year was as well. If you have one of these videos or anything, let me know, or comment your response down below. I would love to know your answers. That's all I got for this video, so I'll see you guys next time. Bye.